Do you book excursions with the cruise line or on your own? It's one of the biggest cruise debates. I've heard never book ship tours. I've also heard always book ship tours. Both sides are right and both sides are wrong. Today we're breaking down what actually matters so that you don't overspend or miss the ship. My name is Shane with MapBound and welcome to our channel. Now, do you personally prefer excursions or do you prefer to do things on your own at a port? Leave a comment below. Now I have to say section 7 really surprised me. I'll go over them more later on in this video. The question is, what cruise line excursions really buy you? There's a whole bunch of details that go into it if you're buying for protection, not just the activity. So what's included when you buy an excursion from the cruise line? One, and to me is the biggest reason, is that you're guaranteed to return to the ship. One of my biggest fears, whether I'm on any excursion, is making sure I get back to the ship. I usually try to get back there between an hour to 2 hours before the boarding time, but I'm a nervous Nelly, so I always make sure that I have all my T's crossed. Another one would be that the cruise excursions will coordinate their time with the port schedule. Because of this, it makes it a lot harder for you to miss the ship. Plus, when you do a cruise line excursion, the ship always knows where you are. And if a delay does happen, you get priority access to assistance if your excursion is delayed. Just remember, the ship won't leave without you if you're on one of their excursions. And yes, you may find an excursion that's going to be a lot cheaper that you booked on your own. You're saving money, but with a cruise ship excursion, you're paying for insurance in the price. All a cruise excursion really is a logistics service, just with a tour attached. But it doesn't always mean that you should always get the cruise line excursion. Let's go over what independent excursions offer you and why experienced cruisers use them. A big thing for me would be smaller group size. A lot of times with smaller group size, you could ask more questions, you could be more hands-on. You can also get a little more authenticity, as well as meet more of the local. A lot of times independent excursions can be half the cost of a cruise ship excursion. Also keep in mind with independent excursions, they know you need to get back to the ship too as well, and most of them will take that into account when they make the schedule for the excursion. But one of the biggest things that a lot of people like is you control the day and have more freedom instead of following a group in an excursion. A lot of times you could have a private driver with your independent excursion, which my second time in Cozumel, we hired a private driver to do a dune buggy ride around the island. We were able to stop when we want. He gave us advice. We weren't on a time frame, so when we were done and ready to go, we didn't have to wait for the rest of the group to be done. We can move on and go to the next stop. But on the downside, while we were in the dune buggy, although it was amazing time and had fun, I was constantly looking at my watch and nervous whether or not we were going to make it back to the ship in time. Another thing a lot of cruisers like is going to the beach club. Beach clubs, depending on how far they are from the cruise ship, can still be a safe way to enjoy an excursion without the cruise line price. And a lot of times the beach clubs can be within walking distance of the pier. Another one would be walking tours. A lot of independent walking tours go on. I have actually taken a walking tour. I did one of the haunted walking tours in Galveston when I was at the airport. And one thing I did like about that is if I needed to leave at any time, I could leave. The tour was really cool. Not only did it cover some of the haunted stories of Galveston, but it also told us the history too as well. Now, this one I've not done while on a cruise, but while I have traveled, I've done things like this, which is really good for the foodies, a food tour. Usually it's just like a walking tour. Sometimes it can be in a bus, but at the same time, you're focusing more on the food of the local area. But at the end of the day, the independent cruises sell the destination, where the cruise lines sell you reliability and the insurance you're getting back on the ship. One of my biggest fears is missing the ship altogether. It's stressful enough planning a trip a year in advance. If you miss the ship, you're planning a trip on the fly, which usually is more expensive. So keep in mind, the ship's going to wait for their excursions to come back. And ships rarely wait for anybody who's on a private tour. But remember, ports operate around cruise schedules. Most reputable operators will plan backwards from their departure time. Now, missing the ship can happen in many ways, but here are some ways to make sure you lower your risk so you're not the next YouTube video of another pier runner. One, the longer the distance your destination is from the cruise ship, the higher the risk goes. So, especially when you're planning your own excursions, try to keep them within reasonable distance of the cruise ship port. And some people I've talked to don't go anywhere unless they can see the ship. Number 2 would be tender port. Tender port makes some islands that don't have huge cruise ports still accessible by a cruise line. Basically, the cruise ship docks offshore, and then you wait in line with other cruisers to get on a boat to be ferried to the actual port of call. The third thing a lot of people forget about, but your travel time is also going to depend on the local traffic. traffic. If you're not used to a foreign country's traffic schedules, or if you're not familiar with like local festivals or big events that would increase the traffic. Now, some of these you can plan for, such as knowing if there is an event going on at that port. For instance, we went to Puerto Rico, we got to the port and they're having the San Sebastian Festival. When I planned this port, I planned on walking everywhere. I did bring, though, the ARP sisters, my mom and my aunt, who couldn't necessarily walk everywhere I wanted to go. So we were planning on getting a cab. But because of the festival, unless you wanted to go to the main part of the island, they were not doing any taxis. So our plan to take taxis to the forts failed. So in turn, they didn't see as much of the island as they wanted, all because there was a festival going on in Old San Juan. The fourth thing would be tight port schedules. Some ports are only going to have a couple hours, where others will have multiple hours. And on a rare occasion, you may even have an overnight stay at a port. Another problem about the tight port schedules too is we've actually had cruise port where they took a couple hours off the port day because there was a storm coming and they wanted to make sure we left in a safe manner. Now, if you're booked through the cruise line, you would have nothing to worry about with your excursions. But if you were booked with a private party, with the cruise coming back 2 hours early, I don't know if a private excursion is going to be able to do that. They may end up canceling, or maybe they'll try to risk it and see what happens. Not something I'd want to do. And just keep in mind that a ship may not even go to that port if something happens, usually because of weather like high wind or a storm. But if that does happen, you may be out money for that port's excursion. A good rule to always keep in mind is the farther away you're going from the cruise ship, the higher the risk of you being left behind is. Think about it, there are two different groups planning a vacation. One wants to do the cruise line excursions. One found an amazing deal with one of the private excursions. The first person who booked through the cruise line boards the bus, everything's going great, but 45 minutes on the way to the Chichen Itza pyramid, their bus breaks down. Some passengers start to panic and call the ship and find out the ship already knows. What the cruise line will do is they'll generally send another bus to pick you up, and the departure is delayed a little. But it was a quick fix that the cruise line was already prepared for. In this scenario, everybody makes it back stress-free and happy. Now, what about the group that booked the private excursion? They booked an excursion, they wanted to go to a specific beach an hour away from the port. They get there, they enjoy their day, and they go ahead and leave at the scheduled time that they prepared to make sure that they get back to the ship. About 5 minutes into the trip, traffic slows to almost a complete stop. You don't know why, you didn't know what happened, or how you could have prevented it. Now, in this scenario, they make it back, but what kind of vacation are you on if you're stressing out the whole time about whether or not you're going to make it back to the ship? Now, both of these scenarios worked out, but they definitely were totally different experiences. And keep in mind, it's not just about the risk involved, but it's also about the peace of mind you're going to have when you're on the excursion and how much uncertainty you're willing to carry. Now, when it comes to certain scenarios, there are times when it would be better to book through the cruise line and not through the private excursion. One of them would be if the port is a short stop, just a couple of hours. Now, there are multiple reasons you should do a cruise excursion. Short port stops would be one big one. A lot of times there's not enough margin for delays. If you're going somewhere with complex transportation, maybe the infrastructure in the area isn't the greatest. Could be overcrowded, could be harder to get to said locations. Also, remember there could be trains involved, ferries, mountain roads. Also, I found if you want more security, say it's a bucket list excursion, and I would always book through the cruise line for that because I definitely want insurance for my bucket list port. For instance, when I went to the Maya pyramids in Mexico, I have always wanted to see them. And I booked that excursion through the cruise line. It was about 4 hours driving total. We literally got to the cruise ship about 30 minutes before departure time, but we didn't have anything to worry about because we were with a cruise line excursion. Not only bucket list items would I book through the cruise line, but also if it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, I would definitely want the insurance that the cruise line offered. Is this your first time traveling internationally? I've been traveling internationally for over 25 years now, so I've had experience in a lot of different areas, but if I was a first time international traveler, I would probably stick to the cruise line instead of exploring on my own. And in conjunction to that, if you have less travel confidence, you should also book through the cruise line. If that port offers only tender ports, then I definitely would book through the cruise line too, because tender ports are time consuming. You not only do you have to wait to get on board, then there's travel time to get to the port. And then when you get back, you again have to wait in line at the tender port. It again takes more time to travel to the cruise ship. Just keep in mind, the more moving parts or logistics there are, the higher risk of missing the ship. And lastly, if you ever have any kind of timing uncertainty, it'll probably be best to book with the cruise line. At the end of the day, you're buying peace of mind more than you are the convenience. I'm not trying to scare you so you don't ever book an independent excursion, because don't get me wrong, I've done quite a few and I love them. But there are times when independent excursions can be the right way to go. One quick and easy one would be if you're going to the beach, having a beach day. A lot of times these are actually in walking distance of the port, which makes it easier, and usually you can see the ship from where you're swimming. Walkable ports would be great, but keep in mind, for instance, a walkable port is another time a private excursion could be safer for you. And whenever the logistics is simple, usually it's a safer option. A lot of the islands in the Caribbean are walkable, and if your port call is the cruise line's private island, these are a safer option too as well. If you're wanting to do like a local food or culture tour, especially if it's near the port, that could be safer. And a lot of times you'll find these experience better when you're actually doing it with the locals. And experienced travelers would be more comfortable with a lot more time management. Now, sometimes a port of call can actually be an overnight stay, or say it's an extra long port of stay. These are usually a lot more safe when it comes to booking a private excursion. The key thing to remember is the simpler the plan, the safer your independent bookings will become. Now, the topic that I mentioned in the beginning of the video is the hidden cost most cruisers ignore. Because at the end of the day, the real cost isn't just the money, it's the time and experience you had at the excursion. And because money isn't the only cost, time and experience being part of the cost, keep in mind large groups slow everything down. They usually only have a certain amount of time at each stop, so you could either be shorted the amount of time you wanted, or maybe you didn't want to be there as long as you were. With large groups, you're waiting on buses, you're waiting on head counts, making sure everybody's on board, and following their schedule. And sometimes because of this, it really makes the experience seem rushed. Now, those are just the hidden costs when it comes to the cruise line, but there also can be hidden costs when you book through an independent excursion. When it comes to independent excursions, you definitely want to do more research, so it's definitely going to cost you more planning time. And while you're researching, you're also wanting to make sure you're looking for reputable companies who've been doing this for a while and has built a reputation as a safe, independent excursion. Lastly, since you are managing your own schedule, it's going to take a lot more time for you to plan that schedule. Whereas the cruise line, usually it's all done for you. But at the end of the day, cruise line excursions will cost you more money, but independent tours will cost you more responsibility. So I like the hybrid approach, which is book excursions with the cruise line for 1 to 2 ports, especially with complex ports or destinations far away from the cruise port, and then leave the private excursions or self-guided tours to much easier or walkable ports. So when it all comes down to it, cruise line excursions aren't rip-offs, they're just insurance. They're insurance knowing that you'll get back on the ship. Independent tours aren't risky if you know when to do them and you pick wisely. Pro cruisers know that you can miss out on experiences if you aren't willing to do both. Now, I've done both and I had great experiences with them all. I'd love to hear your story, good or bad, about your excursions. Now, my next video is going to be what happens if you do miss the ship on port, so definitely subscribe so that you don't miss it. My name is Shane with MapBound. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to follow me on Facebook, check out my website, and look for my cruise approved item. And remember, travel is life.